In the heart of glamorous Paris, a poor boy and Johnny Depp, a renowned musician, cross paths to compose a symphony that changes their lives forever. Stay tuned to uncover the details of this magical story. The streets of Paris came alive in the morning light. In Montmartre, artists sat with their easels while musicians played soft tunes on street corners. The smell of fresh bread and coffee drifted from small cafes where locals and tourists alike shared quiet conversations. Johnny Depp walked these streets alone, his dark sunglasses and simple jacket helping him blend into the crowd. Once, his music had filled concert halls around the world. Now, he felt empty, searching for something he had lost along the way. Just another day, he whispered to himself, watching a young street artist sketch portraits. The simplicity of the scene touched something in his heart. These artists created purely for the love of their craft, without the weight of fame and expectations he carried. His phone buzzed in his pocket, another message from his manager. Johnny ignored it. He had come to Paris to escape exactly this, the constant pressure, the endless demands, the feeling that his music had become more about business than passion. In his small hotel room, unfinished songs lay scattered across the desk. Each piece of paper represented another failed attempt to find the spark that once made his music special. The melodies that used to flow so naturally now felt forced and hollow. Perhaps here in Paris, he thought, watching people pass by his window. The city had always welcomed artists seeking inspiration. Street musicians played with pure joy, their music floating through the narrow alleys of Montmartre. Their freedom reminded Johnny of his early days, when making music was simply about expressing what was in his heart. He stepped out onto the street, letting the sounds of the city wash over him. An old accordion player nodded as he passed, the simple tune carrying more emotion than any symphony Johnny had written lately. For the first time in months, he felt his shoulders relax. In this city of artists and dreamers, maybe he could remember what it meant to create music just because his soul needed it. On another corner of Montmartre, a different kind of music filled the air. Leo, a small 12-year-old boy with messy brown hair, stood playing his violin. His worn sweater had patches at the elbows, but his eyes shone with determination as his bow moved across the strings. "Just a few more hours," he whispered to himself, glancing at the small cup near his feet. The coins inside would help buy medicine for his mother. Each note he played carried his love for her, his determination to help in any way he could. The violin in his hands was old and scratched, but to Leo, it was the most precious thing he owned. His mother had found it at a flea market, saving every spare penny for months to buy it. She couldn't see the instrument, her eyes had lost their light years ago, but she could hear the beauty Leo created with it. "My little musician," she would say, smiling in the direction of his playing. "The violin sings so sweetly in your hands." Overcome by depression and depression treatment, John finally gave up. Leo had taught himself to play, spending countless hours practicing in their tiny apartment. He would sit by the window, watching YouTube videos on a borrowed phone, his fingers moving carefully over the strings until they got it right. Sometimes his mother would sit nearby, humming along as he practiced. "Mom, I learned a new song today," he would tell her each evening, pride filling his voice. Though she couldn't work because of her blindness, she gave him something far more valuable: belief in his dreams. The old violin might have been out of tune, its surface marked with years of use, but in Leo's hands it came alive. Passers-by would often stop, drawn by the pure emotion in his playing. Some dropped coins in his cup, others just smiled. But each note Leo played was a thank you to his mother, who had sacrificed so much to give him this gift of music. Life had drawn two very different paths for Leo and Johnny, yet both searched for something deeper in the music they played. While Leo practiced his violin in the chilly morning air, Johnny wandered the streets alone, both trying to find their way through different kinds of darkness. In his small apartment, Leo would often stand before the mirror, pretending to bow to an audience after a grand performance. "Thank you, he would whisper softly, careful not to wake his mother. But then reality would creep back in. The peeling wallpaper, the stack of unpaid bills on the table, the empty medicine bottles that needed refilling. "Maybe someday," he would tell his mother during their simple dinners, "I saw a real concert violinist on TV today. The way he played, Mom, it was like magic." His mother would smile, her unseeing eyes filled with warmth. "You have that magic too, Leo. I hear it every time you play." But Leo knew better. Professional musicians studied in fancy schools, played expensive instruments, and didn't worry about keeping the lights on. His dreams of performing in concert halls felt as distant as the stars he could barely see through their tiny window. Meanwhile, Johnny sat in his hotel room, surrounded by the very success that Leo dreamed of, yet feeling more lost than ever. He picked up an old magazine from his desk, his own face staring back at him from the cover. "Musical genius strikes again," the headline declared. Johnny tossed it aside with a bitter laugh. If they only knew how empty those words felt now. He remembered his early days playing in small clubs, when music flowed from his heart like a river. The melodies used to come so easily then, each note carrying pure joy and passion. But success had changed everything. "Make it bigger," they would say, "more impressive, more innovative." With each hit album, each sold-out concert, the pressure grew. The music became a product, measured in sales and streams. The simple joy of creating disappeared under the weight of expectations. "I can't remember the last time I played just for myself," Johnny muttered, looking out at the Paris skyline. The sounds of street musicians drifted up from below, their simple tunes carrying more honest emotion than anything he'd written in years. He barely heard the plates pouring spiral ripples in the night sky. Two souls in the same city, one dreaming of a future that seemed impossible, the other trying to escape a success that had become a prison. Their stories were different, but their hearts beat to the same rhythm, the pure, simple love of music that had somehow gotten lost along the way. Rain fell softly over Montmartre that afternoon, turning the cobblestone streets dark and shiny. Most street performers had packed up their instruments, seeking shelter from the drizzle. But through the gentle patter of raindrops, a melody floated through the air. Johnny pulled his coat tighter, walking quickly to escape the rain. Then he heard it, a violin playing a tune so sad yet beautiful that it made him stop in his tracks. The music spoke of loneliness and hope, touching something deep inside his tired heart. "Where is that coming from?" he whispered to himself, following the sound around a corner. There, beneath a small awning, stood a young boy playing a battered violin. His eyes were closed, completely lost in the music he created. Water dripped from the edge of the awning, forming a curtain around him, but he played on, undisturbed by the rain or cold. Johnny stood still, forgetting about the rain soaking through his coat. The boy's fingers moved across the strings with natural grace, drawing out notes that seemed to dance with the falling rain. In all his years of performing in grand concert halls, Johnny had rarely heard music played with such pure emotion. He found himself moving closer, drawn by the haunting melody. The violin might have been old and scratched, but in the boy's hands, it sang with a voice that made Johnny's own expensive instruments seem hollow in comparison. For the first time in months, he felt something stir in his heart, a reminder of what music was supposed to be. As the last notes of the melody faded into the rain, Leo opened his eyes. He saw the tall man standing there, listening with such intensity that he hadn't even noticed the rain soaking through his expensive coat. The boy lowered his violin slowly, a gentle smile spreading across his face. "Did you like it?" Leo asked softly, carefully placing his violin in its worn case. The stranger seemed different from his usual audience. There was something in the way he listened, really listened, that touched Leo's heart. The rain continued to fall around them, but neither seemed to notice. "You look like you need this more than I do," Leo said, holding out the colorful pastry. The pink macaron was slightly squished from being in his bag, but his smile made up for its imperfect appearance. "It's raspberry. Sometimes sweet things can make sad days better." The simple gesture seemed to catch the man by surprise. He stared at the offered treat, his eyes growing soft behind his dark glasses. In his world of grand gestures and expensive gifts, this small act of kindness from a street musician felt more genuine than any applause he'd ever received. "My mom says sharing makes everything taste better," Leo added, still holding out the macaron, "even if it's just half of something small." The rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle now, and the late afternoon light made the wet cobblestones gleam. In this quiet moment, under a small awning in Montmartre, something changed. A simple pastry became a bridge between two souls who both needed a friend. "I don't have much," Leo said quietly, breaking the macaron in half with careful fingers. "But I want you to be happier. This is my favorite treat in the whole world." He held out the larger half, his eyes bright with sincerity. The simple words hung in the damp air between them. Johnny felt something catch in his throat as he looked at the boy's outstretched hand. In his world of luxury hotels and first-class flights, he'd forgotten what genuine kindness felt like. "You seem sad," Leo continued, still holding out the macaron, "like the way I feel sometimes when I'm playing sad songs. But sharing always makes things better, doesn't it?" Harry rolled his eyes. Johnny couldn't speak for a moment. Here was this young boy playing on the street for coins, offering him, a stranger, half of his precious treat. The pink macaron might have been slightly crushed, but the gesture itself was perfect in its innocence. David Shenz pressed on, somehow persuaded by something he hadn't tried. He took the offered half gently, as if handling something precious. A drop of rain fell from the awning, landing on his hand, but he barely noticed. The boy's smile was brighter than any spotlight he'd ever stood under. "Sometimes," Leo said, taking a small bite of his half, "when I'm playing music and feeling down, nice people stop to listen. That makes me feel better. So, maybe this can make you feel better too." Johnny looked at the macaron in his hand, then at the old violin case, the worn shoes, the patched jacket, and felt ashamed of all the times he'd complained about his life. This child, with so little, had just taught him something about true wealth. The rain had almost stopped now, leaving behind a fresh, clean scent in the air. In this quiet corner of Paris, a simple act of kindness had cracked open the walls around Johnny's heart, letting in a warmth he hadn't felt in years. "I'm John," he said softly, savoring the last bite of the macaron. "Just someone who loves music." He smiled at the simplicity of this truth, even if it wasn't the whole story. For once, it felt good to be just another person on the streets of Paris. "I'm Leo," the boy replied, picking up his violin again. "Would you like to hear another song?" His small fingers positioned the instrument under his chin with practiced care. Johnny nodded, leaning against the wall. As Leo began to play, the melody wrapped around them like a warm blanket. It wasn't perfect. Some notes wavered, others scratched. But there was something pure in the way Leo played that made these imperfections beautiful. The music took Johnny back to his own beginnings. He remembered playing in his parents' garage, not caring if anyone listened. Back then, music wasn't about record deals or critic reviews. It was about the joy of creating something from his heart. That was beautiful, Johnny said when Leo finished. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Leo clapped him on the back. "I teach myself," Leo answered, patting his old violin lovingly. "Sometimes I watch videos on my neighbor's phone, but mostly I just play what I feel inside." "Oh," said Paul. Johnny closed his eyes for a moment, letting those words sink in. When was the last time he had played simply what he felt inside? Somewhere along the way, he'd forgotten that simple truth. Music wasn't about perfection. It was about feeling. "Would you play another?" he asked, and for the first time in months he felt like a student again, eager to learn something new. Leo's eyes lit up as he lifted his bow, ready to share more of his heart through music. Every afternoon, Johnny found himself returning to the same corner of Montmartre. He would bring 2 hot chocolates, one for himself and one for Leo. The boy's face would light up each time he saw his new friend approach. "Try holding the bow like this," Johnny demonstrated one day, gently adjusting Leo's grip. "It will help you control the sound better." His experienced hands guided Leo's smaller ones, showing him how to draw smoother notes from the old violin. "Like this?" Leo asked, trying the new technique. The difference was immediate. The notes rang clearer, more confident. Johnny nodded, smiling at how quickly the boy learned. As they sat sharing cookies one rainy afternoon, Leo opened up about his life. "Mom can't see anymore," he said quietly, looking down at his cup. "She had an accident at work 2 years ago. That's why I play here every day, to help with the bills." Johnny listened, his heart heavy. "That must be hard." "Sometimes," Leo admitted. "But Mom still smiles every day. And she bought me this violin from the flea market." He patted the instrument lovingly. "She saved for months to get it." Dick stopped, uncertain. "Do you ever think about playing professionally?" Johnny asked carefully. Leo's eyes lit up for a moment, then dimmed. "I saw the Paris Symphony Orchestra on TV once. It was like magic." He sighed, plucking absently at his violin strings. "But that's just a dream. You need special schools for that, and we can barely afford food sometimes." "So," Johnny watched the boy, recognizing the same passion he'd once felt himself. But where his own drive had been nurtured by privilege and opportunity, Leo's talent bloomed despite every obstacle. The pure love of music shone through every note the boy played. Back in his hotel room that evening, Johnny sat at his piano, his fingers hovering over the keys. For the first time in months, melodies danced in his head, eager to be released. They weren't the complicated compositions his producers always demanded. These were simple, honest tunes inspired by Leo's street corner performances. He began to play softly, capturing the gentle way Leo smiled while playing his violin. The melody grew stronger, weaving in the sounds of rain on cobblestones and the quiet determination in the boy's eyes. Without thinking, Johnny reached for his notebook and began writing notes. "This one's for Leo," he whispered, working late into the night. The music flowed naturally now, telling the story of a young boy with an old violin and a heart full of dreams. Each note carried the pure love of music he'd witnessed in Leo's playing. Morning found him still at the piano, surrounded by sheets of music. The beginning of a symphony had taken shape. Not the grand, showy pieces he was famous for, but something more genuine. It spoke of hope and perseverance, of finding beauty in simple moments. The melody followed the path of Leo's own songs, from the gentle morning tunes to the livelier afternoon pieces. Johnny added layers of orchestra beneath the violin's voice, supporting but never overshadowing the simple beauty of Leo's music. For the first time in years, he felt truly excited about creating something new. "This violin," Leo said one afternoon, carefully polishing the worn wood, "it's not just an instrument. It's like a friend." His small fingers traced the scratches and marks that told stories of countless hours of practice. Even on really hard days, he continued, when Mom is in pain or we're worried about bills, I can play and everything feels a little better. The music helps me be brave. Johnny watched as Leo tenderly placed the violin back in its case. The boy treated the old instrument like a treasure, even though its varnish was fading and its strings were wearing thin. Sometimes I pretend each scratch is a special memory, Leo smiled. This one here? That's from the first time I learned to play Twinkle Twinkle. And this mark? That's from when I earned enough to buy Mom's medicine last winter. Every conversation with Leo became a precious memory for Johnny. He kept a small notebook where he wrote down the boy's words, each page filled with simple wisdom that no music school could teach. The way Leo's face lit up when talking about music, how he played with his whole heart despite having so little. These moments taught Johnny more about art than all his years in the industry. However, some moments made Leo feel defeat. You know what, Leo? Johnny said softly. You're teaching me more than I'm teaching you. But Leo just smiled and lifted his violin to play another tune, unaware that his simple love for music was helping heal a broken artist's heart. One rainy afternoon, Johnny confessed his doubts about composing again. Sometimes I wonder if I've lost my touch, he said quietly, watching the raindrops fall. Leo looked up from his violin with surprise. But your heart still loves music, doesn't it? I can see it when you teach me. The boy's eyes shone with innocent wisdom. Mom says as long as your heart loves something, you should never give up. It's not that simple, Johnny sighed. Sometimes loving something isn't enough. But it is, Leo insisted, hugging his violin close. When I feel sad about being poor or worried about Mom, I just play. The music doesn't care if we're rich or poor, happy or sad, it just wants to be played. Johnny felt something warm stir in his chest at these words. Here was this child, facing real hardships every day, yet still finding joy in pure music. While he had been drowning in self-doubt, Leo had been showing him the way back to what really mattered. You know what's funny? Johnny said, smiling softly. I came here to teach you about music, but you're the one teaching me. Leo grinned and lifted his violin. Then let's both play today. Just for fun, like we did when we first started learning. Ah. As they played together under the awning, Johnny realized that helping Leo wasn't just about teaching violin techniques. Each lesson, each shared smile, was slowly healing his own broken spirit, reminding him why he fell in love with music in the first place. One evening, as Johnny walked back to his hotel after listening to Leo play, something clicked in his mind. The boy's talent was too precious to waste. He thought about his own journey, the opportunities he'd been given, and knew what he had to do. In his hotel room, Johnny pulled out his phone and started making calls. Old friends, music teachers, anyone who might help. His fingers trembled slightly as he dialed the number for the National Music Academy. Sir Jameson stepped forward. The $sign on his belt glowed. "Oh, this is Johnny Depp," he said softly into the phone. "I need to talk about a special young violinist." His voice grew stronger as he described Leo's talent, the pure emotion in his playing, the way music flowed naturally from his heart. The Academy director listened with interest. "A scholarship might be possible," she said, "but the boy would need to audition. Certain. Is the boy ready, committed, and responsible?" Johnny spent the next few days reaching out to every music organization he knew in Paris. Some remembered their own humble beginnings and were eager to help. Others needed more convincing. But Johnny was determined. "You should have heard him play," he told each person. "This boy has something special, something you can't teach." While waiting for responses, Johnny visited the finest violin shop in Paris. The owner, an old Italian craftsman, showed him instrument after instrument. None seemed quite right until he saw it, a violin with warm, honey-colored wood and delicate curves. "May I?" Johnny picked it up carefully. The first note sang through the air, clear and pure. He smiled, knowing this was the one. It would help Leo's talent soar. The next afternoon, Johnny found Leo at his usual corner. The boy was playing his old violin, each note fighting against the instrument's limitations. Johnny waited until he finished the song. "Leo," he said, sitting beside him on the bench, "I have something to tell you." He explained about the academy, the scholarship possibilities, and watched Leo's eyes grow wide with wonder. "But," Leo looked down at his worn shoes, "I'm just a street musician. They wouldn't want someone like me." "Me?" Johnny placed the new violin case beside Leo. "Open it," he said gently. Leo's hands shook as he lifted the lid. His gasp echoed in the quiet street. It's beautiful," he whispered, barely daring to touch the gleaming wood. "Oh, this violin needs someone special to play it," Johnny said. "Someone who plays from the heart. Someone like you." Tears filled Leo's eyes as he carefully lifted the instrument. When he drew the bow across the strings, the sound was so pure it made Johnny's heart ache. "But why?" Leo asked, holding the violin like it might disappear. "Why are you doing all this?" "Why?" Amelia said. Johnny smiled, remembering his own first violin. "Because talent like yours deserves a chance to grow. And because you reminded me what music is really about." Leo played his first song on the new violin right there on the street. The melody soared above the city noise, carrying all his dreams with it. Johnny watched, knowing this was just the beginning of something extraordinary. The morning sun cast long shadows across the narrow street as Johnny climbed the stairs to Leo's apartment. His arms were full, a violin case in one hand, a folder of sheet music in the other. His heart beat faster with each step. Leo opened the door, his eyes growing wide at the sight. "Johnny, what are you doing here?" Tyler stared before answering. Then, "I have something for you," Johnny smiled, stepping inside. Clara sat in her usual chair by the window, turning her face toward the sound of their voices. Johnny placed the violin case gently on their small table. "This is yours now, Leo," he said softly. But that's not all. He pulled out an envelope from the folder. "This is an invitation to audition at the National Academy next month." Leo's hands trembled as he took the envelope. Really? But There's more," Johnny continued, his voice warm with excitement. He spread out sheets of music across the table. "I wrote this symphony, Leo. It's called The Symphony of Hope. And I wrote it for you." Clara moved closer, her unseeing eyes bright with emotion. "A symphony? For Leo?" "Yes," Johnny said, then took a deep breath. "And Mrs. Clara, I've been talking to some doctors. There's a surgery that could help you see again. I'd like to pay for it." "That would be wonderful. I'll pay it on Monday." The room fell silent. Clara's hands gripped her chair tightly. "But that would cost..." "Money doesn't matter," Johnny said gently. "What matters is giving Leo's mother a chance to see him play on stage one day." Tears rolled down Clara's cheeks. "Why would you do this for us?" Johnny looked at Leo, who was still staring at the music sheets in wonder. "Because your son reminded me what music really means. It's not about fame or perfection. It's about hope, about touching hearts, and about becoming better than you were. My best friend, Johnny, has become my wife." Leo looked up at his mother, then at Johnny. His small voice shook with emotion. "Mom, you could see again. You could watch me play." The robes caught, filling with plastic, and before Leo knew what he was doing, he shook out one side. Clara reached out, finding her son's hand. Johnny watched them, feeling the pure love between mother and child. This, he thought, was what his music had been missing, this simple, honest emotion that could change lives. The Saint-Marie Hospital stood tall and pristine in the heart of Paris. Clara held Leo's hand tightly as they walked through its gleaming corridors. Johnny followed close behind, handling all the paperwork and arrangements. "Everything will be fine, Mom," Leo whispered, squeezing her hand. The hospital smell made him nervous, but he tried to sound brave, for her sake. The doctors spoke in gentle, confident tones as they explained the procedure. Clara nodded along, her unseeing eyes focused straight ahead. Johnny watched as Leo never left his mother's side, even when the nurses came to take her measurements and run tests. "Would you like to play something for your mother?" Johnny asked Leo the night before surgery. Noticing how the boy clutched his violin case, the hospital had given special permission for him to bring it. Leo nodded and took out his violin. The melody that filled the quiet hospital room was soft and sweet, like a lullaby. Other patients peeked in through the door, drawn by the beautiful music. Clara smiled, her hands folded in her lap, letting the music wash away her fears. The morning of the surgery came too quickly. "I love you, Leo," Clara whispered as the nurses prepared to take her away. "Keep playing for me." She lowered herself into her chair. Leo and Johnny sat in the waiting room for hours. The boy practiced his fingering silently on his violin, too nervous to make actual sound. Johnny brought him hot chocolate and told him stories about his own early days of playing music, trying to keep his mind occupied. "How long until we know?" Leo asked for the 100th time, his small face lined with worry. Frigitz turned to Leo with surprise. "Soon," Johnny assured him, though his own heart was racing. He had arranged for the best surgeons, but still, he prayed everything would go perfectly. When the doctor finally appeared, his smile told them everything before he spoke. "The surgery went very well," he said, "but now we wait for healing." Days passed slowly. Leo played his violin in the hospital garden, where Clara could hear him from her room. Johnny stayed with them, postponing concerts and meetings. Nothing felt more important than being there for this family, exquisite pleasure of every day. Finally, after what seemed like forever, the day came to remove Clara's bandages. The doctor worked carefully, unwrapping layer after layer. Leo held his breath, his violin clutched tight against his chest. Johnny stood by the window, his heart pounding. Slowly, the doctor took the bandage off. "Open your eyes slowly," the doctor instructed gently. "The light might be bright at first." Clara blinked once, twice. Tears started streaming down her face. "I can see," she whispered. "Oh God, I can see." Her gaze found Leo, taking in every detail of his face. "My beautiful boy." Leo rushed into her arms, both of them crying now. Clara touched his face, matching the features she had known by touch with what she could now see. "Your eyes. They're exactly how I remembered them." Her words were gentle. She didn't want him to hurt her. "Clara." She held him in place. She looked around the room, drinking in every detail until her gaze fell on Johnny. "Thank you," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "You've given us back our life." "And Eric?" Aaron asked urgently. Johnny watched mother and son embrace, feeling his own eyes grow wet. Clara's joy was like sunrise after the longest night, pure, bright, and full of promise. In all his years of music, no symphony had ever sounded as beautiful as Clara's laughter as she saw her son smile for the first time in years. The morning of Leo's audition dawned bright and clear. His new violin felt warm in his hands as he waited outside the Academy's grand hall. Johnny sat beside him, humming softly to help calm his nerves. Even a hammer was a treasure. "Remember," Johnny whispered, "play from your heart, just like you did on the street corner." Clara, now able to see, straightened Leo's collar with trembling hands. "You'll be wonderful, my love." When they called his name, Leo walked into the hall alone. The judges sat behind a long table, their faces serious. But Leo didn't feel afraid anymore. He lifted his violin, closed his eyes, and began to play. The music flowed from his heart, just as it had on those cold mornings in Montmartre. He played about his mother's love, about Johnny's kindness, about dreams coming true. Each note carried his story, pure and true. When he finished, the room stayed silent for a moment. Then the head judge smiled. "How old are you, Leo?" 12, sir." "In all my years," the judge said, "I've never heard someone so young play with such emotion." 2 days later, the letter arrived. Leo's hands shook as he opened it, with Johnny and Clara watching anxiously. His eyes scanned the page, then filled with tears of joy. "I got in," he cried. "They said I'm the youngest student they've ever accepted." Clara hugged him tight, crying happy tears. Johnny beamed with pride, knowing this was just the beginning of Leo's journey. Weeks later, the Paris concert hall buzzed with excitement. Johnny stood backstage, preparing for the premiere of his Symphony of Hope. The orchestra warmed up, their instruments blending together. In the front row, Leo sat with his mother, both dressed in their finest clothes. Clara could hardly believe she was really seeing her son in this beautiful hall, watching him point out different instruments to her with excitement. The lights dimmed, Johnny walked onto stage to thunderous applause, but before lifting his baton, he turned to the audience. "This symphony," he said softly, "was inspired by a young boy who reminded me what music truly means. It's about hope, about dreams, and about the pure joy of playing from the heart." Litalius Busmach. As the first notes filled the hall, Leo squeezed his mother's hand. He recognized the melody. It was the same tune he used to play on his old violin under the rain. Now it soared with the full power of an orchestra, but still carried the simple beauty of those street corner songs. The audience sat spellbound, caught up in the magic of the music. When the final note faded away, there was a moment of hushed silence. Then the hall erupted in applause. Johnny smiled, his eyes finding Leo in the crowd. They had both found their dreams, the boy from the street corner and the lost musician who found his way back to music's heart. The Symphony of Hope took Paris by storm. Radio stations played recordings daily, and people hummed its melodies in cafes and streets. But it wasn't just the music they loved. It was the story behind it, the tale of a street musician and a famous composer finding hope in each other's kindness-touched hearts across the city. End of poem. "Your symphony speaks to everyone," a critic told Johnny after one performance. "It reminds us what we can achieve when we help each other." Johnny smiled, watching people leave the concert hall. Some were wiping away tears, others were hugging their loved ones. The music had become more than just notes on a page. It had become a bridge between hearts. The rabbi's words echoed soullessly inside his head. "I never expected this," Johnny confided to Leo during a rehearsal. "For years I thought music was about perfection, but you showed me it's about connection." One evening, the concert hall manager approached Johnny with an idea. "What if you and Leo performed together, the boy who inspired the symphony, playing alongside its composer?" The thought occurred to me. The night of their joint performance arrived on a warm spring evening. Backstage, Johnny adjusted Leo's bow tie. "Nervous?" "Little," Leo admitted. "But good nervous. like the first time I played for you in the rain." Clara sat in the front row, her healed eyes bright with excitement. She could see every detail now: the gleam of the stage lights on Leo's violin, the proud smile on Johnny's face, the packed audience waiting in hushed anticipation. As the orchestra began to play, Johnny conducted with one hand, while Leo stood beside him, violin ready. When Leo's solo began, his pure, clear notes soared above the orchestra. The melody was the same one he used to play on street corners, but now it carried all the hope and joy of his journey. Clara watched through happy tears as her son played. She could see his fingers dancing across the strings, the peaceful smile on his face, all the little details she had missed for so long. Her heart felt ready to burst with pride. The audience sat spellbound. In that moment, no one cared that Leo was just a boy from the streets, or that Johnny had once lost his way. The music spoke of something universal: the power of kindness to transform lives. As the final notes faded away, the hall erupted in applause. Johnny pulled Leo into a warm hug, both of them grinning. Clara stood with the cheering crowd, her face glowing with joy as she watched her son take a bow. "Mom," Leo called out from the stage, "can you see me?" "I can see you, my darling," Clara called back, her voice full of love. "I can see everything now." In that perfect moment, under the bright lights of the grand hall, they were all exactly where they were meant to be. The boy who dared to dream, the musician who found his heart again, and the mother whose love had never dimmed, even in darkness. "Tell us about the boy who changed your music," the interviewer asked Johnny one sunny morning. The cameras rolled as Johnny smiled, remembering that rainy day in Montmartre. "I love Canva. Leo taught me that music isn't about fame," he answered softly. "It's about touching hearts." Here was this young boy, playing on the streets to help his blind mother, yet he shared his last treat with a stranger just to make them smile. The interview touched millions. Letters poured in from people moved by Leo's story and Johnny's kindness. But Leo himself was busy with something new. Every weekend, he visited community centers with his violin. He played for elderly residents, sick children, and anyone who needed hope. His new violin sang sweetly as he moved from room to room, bringing smiles to tired faces. "Music helped me dream," he told a group of children at a shelter. "Now I want to help others dream too." He taught them simple tunes, watching their eyes light up when they created their own music. Johnny, inspired by these small acts of kindness, made a big decision. He established the Melody of Hope Foundation, using his own funds to start it. "Every child deserves a chance to make music," he announced at the opening ceremony. "This foundation will provide instruments, lessons, and support to talented young musicians who can't afford them. But more than that, we'll help their families too." The foundation grew quickly. Soon violins, pianos, and other instruments found their way into grateful hands. Children who once only dreamed of music now had real chances to learn. The Children's Museum in the barracks at Sarajevo was happy to help clean up the legacy. Clara found her own way to give back. She volunteered at the hospital where she had her surgery, sitting with nervous patients awaiting their own operations. "I know how scary it feels," she would tell them, her kind eyes full of understanding. "But miracles can happen. Look at me. I can see my son perform now, all because someone chose to be kind." She started a support group for parents of young musicians, sharing her experience of nurturing a child's dream through difficult times. Her gentle words and warm smile gave others the courage to keep hoping. "Remember when we had nothing but an old violin and hope?" she asked Leo one evening after a community performance. Leo nodded, looking around at the children clutching their new instruments, their faces glowing with possibility. "Now, we can help others have hope too." Together, this small family that had once known such hardship became a beacon of light for others. Their story reminded everyone that kindness, like music, had the power to change lives, one note at a time. The old corner in Montmartre looked just the same, but everything else had changed. Leo stood in his familiar spot, but this time Johnny stood beside him. A small crowd had gathered, knowing something special was about to happen. "This is where it all began," Leo said softly, touching the old awning where he used to shelter from the rain. The memory of those days felt like a distant dream now. Johnny nodded, remembering that rainy afternoon when a boy's kindness had touched his heart. "Shall we play for them, just like old times?" They began to play together, the famous composer and his young protege. The melody of the Symphony of Hope floated through the streets, but simpler now, more intimate. Just two violins speaking to each other in the language of music. People stopped their hurried walks, drawn by the familiar tune. A mother held her child up to see better. An old man wiped tears from his eyes. Even the busy cafe owners stepped outside to listen. "Look at them," Johnny whispered between movements. "Music still has the power to make people pause and feel." Leo smiled, remembering how he used to play here alone, hoping someone would stop to listen. Now the street was full of people, all connected by the simple magic of melody. "Who would have thought," Leo said as they finished playing, "that sharing half a macaron could change so much?" said Leo. Johnny put his arm around Leo's shoulders. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness have the biggest echoes. They looked out at the crowd, seeing in their faces the same hope and joy that had brought them together on this very corner not so long ago. Leo stood before a group of young students at a community center, his violin tucked under his arm. "I started just like you," he told them, "playing on street corners, dreaming big dreams." The children leaned forward, eyes wide with wonder. One small girl raised her hand. "Were you scared when you first started?" "Every day," Leo smiled. "But music gave me courage. It can do the same for you." He lifted his violin and played a few notes from the Symphony of Hope, watching their faces light up with joy. At the National Music Academy, something unprecedented happened. The director added the Symphony of Hope to their official curriculum. "This piece teaches more than music," she explained to her colleagues. "It teaches humanity." Students now studied not just the notes, but the story behind them. They learned how a simple act of kindness between a street musician and a famous composer had created something magical. Johnny sat in on one of these classes, watching quietly from the back as young musicians analyzed his work. But they weren't just studying the technical aspects. They were discussing how music could change lives. "Sir," a student asked Johnny after class, "did you know your symphony would help so many people?" Johnny shook his head, smiling softly. "I just wrote what Leo taught me. That music isn't just about the notes we play. It's about the hearts we touch." The symphony had become more than just a beautiful piece of music. It had become a symbol of hope, a reminder that kindness and art could transform lives in ways no one could predict. Thank you for watching and being part of this incredible journey. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, leave a comment to share your thoughts, and give us a thumbs up. We'd love to hear from you and continue growing this amazing community together. Stay tuned for more inspiring stories, and we can't wait to see you again in the next one.